this is a great panel of people to talk about this topic. I guess I probably should introduce myself too. My name is Tim, and I have a record label called 777 Music, where we work with Boy Pablo, which is probably the most notable. I don't know what I'm trying to say. This is our biggest artist on our label. And before that, I was working at InGrooves as the director of global digital strategy. So been around the block a little bit myself. So I might chip in on some stuff, but I was going to start off the discussion about a digital marketing strategy based on sort of a hypothesis that these days it starts with the artist. We can correct me if I'm wrong, we can set that straight. But the artist owning their audience and the artist communicating directly through social media is obviously sort of like a hallmark of marketing in our time. And certainly social media is an extremely important part of a digital marketing strategy for a record or when you're starting to market globally. It's one of the primary avenues through which we're reaching out to people and communicating them. So wanted to ask about the foundation of the basic foundational principles of building an engaging digital presence for an artist. So how do we make an artist engaging? How do we build on solid structure? Are there a few simple truths people should know before starting? Basically, are there a few basic things that people should be thinking of that should lie at the foundation of their digital presence? If anyone wants to take that, I'll see that you've unmuted. Here goes Jamie.
I think the most important thing, and I think I see this from, as I said, having worked in press for a while and then moving into working in digital, I think everything to do with social media and digital is a fantastic opportunity that allows artists to actually communicate directly. I think that is the main thing that is important about building that sort of presence for an artist. There's no gatekeepers in the sense of it going through a journalist, and something that you might say to a journalist then has to be potentially spun in a different way that you didn't intend. The fact that you have complete control over everything from your creative all the way through to the caption that you're using, it allows you to really stick to your true values as an artist, as a musician, whatever it is that you're trying to discuss through your social media. It allows you to have complete autonomy and control over that. So I think, from my perspective, the most important fundamental aspect of running a campaign on social media or digital in general is that level of authenticity that comes from an artist's perspective. I think over the last few years with social media, fans have been able to get so much more knowledge of how this industry works. And if they can tell something's fake, it will just have really negative effects on your campaign across the board. So I'd be interested to hear what the other guys on the panel think, because I think personally, having that sort of genuine interaction of authenticity between an artist and fans is probably the most important thing at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jamie. I think obviously right now with what we're dealing with, we're in a different situation. Everything is digital, everything is social. But if you look at even before that, and you look at kind of the different generations, and Gen Z being so key right now, specifically with certain platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they are all about transparency. So what Jamie was saying about being present, being able to talk directly to your fans, being able to kind of set the tone yourself, it's just all about transparency, and that's what people want. And a lot of times, which I'm sure we'll get into later in the panel, a lot of times it's more about you and your personality than it is about the music, or at least it can start that way. Like, you build your social presence a lot of times before the music is even released, or maybe alongside some music that has been released. But you really need to be able to kind of like represent yourself and be that brand and do it completely true to yourself. So there's a bit of transparency, and so fans can then have something to latch on to and become part of like your bubble and your culture.
Yeah, definitely agree on what you guys said. I think a very simple truth that I usually start with when we took on a new artist is that there's no thing such a campaign anymore. It's really 24/7, 365 days a year. everyone can access your music every time, anywhere. It doesn't cost them much. So there is always a chance that your music can be discovered by anyone every given day. So that means there is no such thing as a campaign cycle anymore, which means more work, but also more opportunities. And I think what we advise people mostly is, don't just do something online when you have something that you want them to consume, but also every other time that you want to be relevant, and that's every day.
So authenticity, transparency, and just being on all the time, be that brand. I think it's really hard to falsify a persona if you're supposed to have that as a red thread through everything as well. So there's might be some, I think there's a especially younger artists or artists that maybe are a little bit more, but then that needs to be something that is bulletproof. And even then, most of the time people see through it anyway. Oh, I'm seeing my connection is unstable. Can everyone hear okay?
You were breaking up a little bit for me.
Is that all right?
Same for me, yeah.
And never, anyway, no matter what I say, I agree with you guys. I think these are really important things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the hallmarks of a healthy online presence. This could be abstract, it could be something that's more data-based. So what does good data look like? What means that it's healthy? And maybe conversely, what looks unhealthy? What's a bit of a red flag? This could be something that's a little bit more descriptive, or it could be something data, because I think both are pretty interesting things to think about.
Yeah, I can start with that one maybe. So what I see a lot, maybe just to give something very practical, is when people create content for their audiences, what's happened sometimes that they do one piece of content and use it the same way on every platform. What we would advise is you can talk about the same thing, but it needs to be tied to and very specified to that platform. So on Instagram, you would have different people than on TikTok, than on YouTube, than on Facebook. So it is more work, but it really will increase your KPIs a lot if you don't just do one video and just publish it anywhere and hope for the best. So that's something that I look out for when we initially look at our artist profiles. And maybe on the data thing is you can go into data and it can get very complicated, but one very simple thing is to centralize it and to retarget the same users that you're using in campaigns before. It sounds very easy, but it mostly doesn't really happen because it's not centralized in the artist account. So I would advise every artist, every management, that whenever you do a campaign, whether it's for your recorded music, for live, if that ever happens again, or your merch, to really retarget the same users over and over again and learn more about them over time.
Adding to that, one of the things that to me is the most important that I see a lot with successful artists and campaigns on social media is obviously engagement. So making sure that there's a lot of comments and there's a conversation happening. So it goes back to the first point of what we were talking about with just kind of being yourself, being transparent. You want to have a conversation with these people too. Like it goes back to being a human on social media and being yourself. And if you're engaging with the comments and with the fans, then they'll continue to engage back, which really helps show your engagement rates are up, which then helps the algorithms move your posts up a bit more, which can then help you grow. So it's really, really important to do that and to check your engagement rates. And, it can be really frustrating, and we don't want to live for likes and live for comments. That's not very healthy for us. But if you're just having a conversation and it's natural, then it can really work well for you.
I think the other two have completely hit the nail on the head, really. I think from a more sort of, from a creative perspective, because that's the sort of side that I work on a lot more, the more sort of the actual creation as opposed to maybe data 100% of the time. What I love seeing is when an artist that I'm working with gets incredible engagement on something that didn't necessarily exist to create engagement. So if we've built up a brand so that an artist might over time express that they love like Adidas or they like certain brands and stuff, and then we've put up a post and without saying anything about what they're wearing or what they're doing, the fan base has latched onto the fact that they're doing that and they've learned something about the artist in question. If there's automatically engagement that touches upon all of these parts of the overall sort of brand that we're trying to develop for the artist, along with everyone on the team, from management to the brand department, whatever might be happening, I think that's a really good point, just from a pure sort of, if you're reading into the comments and reading into what the audience is saying. I think it's something that there isn't an easy way to track data about exactly what your comments are saying. But if you're putting up a post and it doesn't have put a comment below with what you think, and you're still getting a ton of really engaging and interesting comments and conversations happening across all of your platforms, I think that's a really positive position to be in.
What about some red flags that things might be a little bit off? I think we've hit a lot of really interesting points on what a healthy online presence looks like. High engagement rate, lots of comments. It's not necessarily about follower numbers. It's more about quality of interaction. And I think all of those things are really important takeaways for people. But, what's the kind of some fishy stuff out there that you guys might see on a pretty regular basis?
People who promise you to get you onto Spotify
page. All the ads I'm getting on Instagram is that at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's, I worked at Spotify and I know you can't get, through any way in a playlist that, you can buy. So that's just something that, would be a red flag for me. And then sometimes when we talk to artists for the first time, we like to create like a mix of earned, owned, and paid media. So when everything comes together, it's a really healthy mix. Sometimes artists lean to one end. Either they only hope for someone else to talk about their brand, which would be earned media, and they only putting in all the hopes, and if nothing happens, they quickly draw away from it. Or they would only buy paid media but don't really put up a story themselves or don't really put any content in it. So I would say if that's not a healthy balance between the three of them, that would be a red flag, because the campaign only relies on one pillar, and that's just not enough, I think.
Yeah, I mean, after you, Rachel.
Oh, that's okay. To add to what Marie was saying is, I think you have to make sure that, kind of going along the same lines of campaign, you have to make sure that you have some other content going on or something else going on as well. Like you can't just like do one post about like a track or an album and then have nothing else happening or not connecting with fans on a personal level as well. So I think kind of looking at unhealthy trends is when you are looking at like Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and there's one post in all of 2 months and it's like, please buy my album. Like that doesn't work at all. And that's not really a way to create a fan base and to get retention. Like there might be some really good activity around that one post, but it needs a lot of other things around it for people to maintain like on that platform and wanting to continue to follow you and see what you're up to. So just bolstering that, like, Marie said, is having a trifecta of a campaign with digital and owned and, or with advertising and owned and that kind of stuff. But it's also about like all the different content that you can put out on socials, and it's not necessarily even one platform. So it's like all of the platforms and maybe even getting into new things like TikTok and Twitch as well.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I can sort of think of as negatives is when, even if you've done multiple posts in a small time period, so you're like posting consistently, if your messaging is always selling, I think that's totally wrong. I don't think social media should ever be used. I don't think anyone should ever think of, I am doing this on the organic side, I'm doing this to sell something. I think the most important thing that you can build through digital and through social media is the relationship with your fan. and the fans' relationship with you. And I think it should be more to do with conversation, building the relationship and the trust forward, instead of flogging them, oh, buy my new single, or here's my tour, buy a ticket to the tour. You know, mention all of these things. And obviously when you've got an amazing announcement, you want to shout about your announcement. But I think if everyone is just constantly, you know, trying to force assets or products down people's throats, that's probably just screams a bit of a red flag to me.
One thing we used to talk about quite a bit with people we were working with is to balance offering people things with asking people to do things. So when you have a call to action, attach it with an offer, like give your audience something in exchange for a call to action. So not just like, hey, my new album's coming out, please pre-save it here. Is sort of to package that in a different way so that it feels like you're offering something. Like get people onto your Spotify page or your Spotify profile by making them a great running playlist if you're the type of person who has running as part of your normal personality on social media, or you know, making it about treating people a little bit more like their friends rather than a financial transaction, and learning to cultivate a fan base that feels like they're getting something from you rather than giving something to you all the time. Nobody wants to feel like it's work, I guess. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to that, it's also, you know, about like, you can ask the question instead of telling someone, kind of ask them to do something or ask them their thoughts on something. And that can start a kind of a communication and a conversation, which then can lead to hopefully them consuming more of your content or going to listen to your music. Or like you said, like if the goal is to create a playlist, it can lead them to create a certain playlist based off a topic of conversation.
I think it's summarizing a few of the things you guys have said. It seems like there aren't really shortcuts. So with Spotify playlisting, there's no shortcuts. If people say that they're going to be pitching your stuff independently, or they're going to get you this amazing coverage through a network of independent playlists, then usually it is too good to be true if it feels like it. If there's a really quick way to get everything done on social media, like I haven't been cultivating my fan base for 2 months, let's get in there and let's just do it because the album's coming out in a week. Normally it's a little bit too late for that. And yeah, anyway.
And you tend to get a lot of backlash too. Like if people can tell that you've like bought followers or anything fishy has happened, especially on the Spotify front, I'm sure Marie can add to that. But like if Spotify can tell that you have a bunch of basically like empty streams from third-party curators, then it really backfires on you.
Additionally, it kind of, like we were talking about having healthy engagement rates with things. If you've got a lot of sort of passive followers that come into your playlist or into your social media, then it just dilutes everything else and makes the entire thing look fishy or just less appealing. It's better to have 50 followers that are interacting with you regularly than 100,000 and only 50 of them are actually interacting with you regularly.
The thing is, that's been an age-old saying for as long as I've, been aware of what goes on in music. Whether you're talking about people buying tickets to a show or just doing stuff with you on social media, whatever it is, you would much rather have a smaller, focused and engaged base of people that love what you do than having tens of thousands of people that have never even heard of you, have no interest in you whatsoever. And I think, going back to what we've all touched on so far, it's that transparency that people actually care about now. And the fact that I know on Instagram, obviously they're hiding likes over time and stuff like this, so it might become more challenging to see it like from an objective perspective. But for the time being, the rest of these platforms, whether it be Spotify or Twitter, across the board, you can still see the number of followers, the number of streams. And if things just don't quite add up, I think it's obvious. And I think it means that, fans are smart enough to notice when something doesn't seem quite right. And I just think the advice that I would give to anyone that I've ever worked with or could be working with would be to just avoid all of that stuff like the plague.
Yeah,
great advice.
To add on that, not everything has to happen on the day of the release. I know it's a very spectacular time and people are nervous, and they are nervous for good reason. But there's so much pressure on the day itself that everything has to happen right away and everything has to roll. I've seen enough cases where a song got picked up 6 months after release because it was worked really well and the marketing was really, really smart. So don't just walk away from something over the weekend when it was released on Friday. Maybe put a little more effort in. If you really think this is a song that deserves that, then don't just leave it in the cold, I would say.
Yeah, I love that too. It's tying into the whole concept of long-term thinking and building a holistic presence and strategy that's not about one moment of making a sale or forcing people into a call to action.
Especially
but
if it isn't a sale. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let people come a little bit naturally and build something that's attracting and engaging people on a regular basis. Then you're going to be converting people all the time. And long after that sort of like pressure moment, because that pressure moment isn't as big of a deal anymore. Maybe if you're hoping for chart exposure, you've got an artist that has an ego that needs to be placated by a hard chart position or something like that. But outside of that, we're really thinking like long tail a lot of the time when it comes to streaming. But we've touched on a few aspects of how to sort of parlay a good engaged fan base into some other aspects of an artist's career where they're probably making a little bit more money. We're talking about streaming, we're talking about live, we're talking about brand partnerships. We've touched on these things a little bit, but I wanted to start to talk a little bit about the role that the online audience plays in some of these other aspects of an artist's career, some of these other revenue streams that artists have, and maybe talking about some ways that artists can leverage their audience to better succeed in these areas. So you're starting to build an engaged fan base. It's looking good. When does that start to affect streaming editorial? When does that start to get you live shows? How can you leverage a strength maybe live to start building a better online fan base? How can you use an online fan base to start selling tickets? All these chicken egg situations. If people have some ideas about how to start talking a little bit practically about some of these things. Rachel.
So, thank you. So for me, it just goes back to social media and building your presence there. And, I know it's a chicken and egg situation, but I guess you could release a song or two, but I think building an audience online is just so important. And I kind of relate it back to like on the branding side of things more than anything. Like obviously you can go to the streaming route, or you can go the live route of answering this question of like how your online presence can help with that, or your audience can help bolster those things as well. But on the branding side, if you look at it like we are now with social media, you almost have to become an influencer in yourself. And this goes back to what Jamie was saying about an artist just naturally doing something online and fans picking up on it. And he used, I think, the example of Adidas. Like if that becomes part of your culture and what you're talking about online, you're a fan of something, whether it's Adidas or you love to drink wine or like all these other things, then you can start to, yeah, exactly. Then you can start to think a little bit more on a wider spectrum, and maybe some of these brands will start to come forward and want to work with you, which then can lead to an even bigger audience, which at that point you're kind of undeniable. And when it comes to your streaming music or your live show, you've built this culture and this group around you that are just hanging on to every word because you have the same likes and dislikes as them. And so then they'll go on to stream and they'll go on to see your live show. It goes without saying, like the same thing with like creating content, like just continuing to build towards what works for you, but in that way, like because you're the output, you have to then like make sure that the audience around you are the ones that would absorb that output. So you have that same kind of middle lane of being able to connect in these different areas outside of music, but also music too. Like you see on Twitch and on Instagram, like all these musicians are doing their own DJ sets, and it's because their fan bases like love most of the same music, or they're really interested in learning about different types of music, and that really helps bolster their audience as well and helps retain people. And then once those fans will want to like look into them further and hopefully become a fan and follow their playlists and all those kinds of things.
I think a thing I find really interesting sort of stemming from that is how I think on the wider sort of campaign perspective of an artist in every sector of the industry, I think it's all to do with building the wider narrative. And, you know, you build up that story from playing shows, whether you're playing 50 cap bars or you're playing 20,000 seater arenas, you're building up that live narrative that feeds into what you're doing on social media. And as you build up your social media following, you're building up your online narrative, which then when your label or your distributor then approaches the likes of Spotify or DSPs in general, you've got both your current streaming data to date, and then on top of that, all of these stories that you've been building up from the wider areas of the campaign that have all been building to really sort of give this whole well-rounded, holistic sort of presentation of data of everything that's been built up over a period of time towards launching into a new campaign. And, you know, I think that's something that's kind of forgotten about quite a lot. That's why, you know, a lot of people that I talk to always hate planning meetings, or they hate getting on conference calls to talk about a project. Whereas I've always looked at it slightly differently, where I like finding out what the other elements of, what else is happening in the other elements of a campaign, because I feel like it always feeds back into something that, especially from such an open and communicative world of digital, there's always something else going on in the campaign that we can make use of to really make sure that we're helping to boost that, you know, awareness even further. So yeah, I think there's, you know, a lot of different things that can really help sort of, you know, within the online world to help push the other sides of things. But I think a lot of it comes down to communication and making sure that everyone within your team or your management or your label, whoever you've got working with you, is just really trying to hit the same levels and making sure that everyone's on the same wavelength.
I think that's a great point, actually, is that sharing information, sharing data, sharing things that are going on, making sure that everybody has the information about how all aspects of the campaign are working. Also that the artist themselves is aware of everything that's going on around them, because sometimes the artist is sort of blissfully unaware of how hard all these people are working around them, or the label doesn't really know what the agent is thinking in terms of long-term strategy. Just sharing your thoughts and having all these different aspects of an artist team, who might be one person, early on, manager, booker, etc. If you're at an early stage, maybe it's you as the artist doing all of that yourself as well. But just making sure that you're thinking about all these different angles and how they interconnect. Maria, I saw you unmuted yourself quite early in this, so I just wanted to make sure you could chime in as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important what Jamie just said, is not to think of online as, you know, another discipline apart from recording and going live and, you know, have your merch. It's where everything comes together. And when we work with someone, we talk to the label, obviously, we talk to the distributor, we talk to the tour agent, and really, try to centralize that story online, because that's where it happens, really. And maybe one more thing about, you know, if we ever get back to concerts and enjoying them live, which is hopefully soon, I think what always, you know, I was, you know, stunned by was, you have all these people in a room who are listening to you and who paid money to see you, and they leave the room and you don't know who they are. Like no other brand, like Mercedes, wouldn't launch a car and, you know, don't know who these people were and just let them walk out of the room again. So I think what's important is to really find a way of retargeting these people afterwards. I know they can't just, you know, hand over their card and say, this is me. This is probably not how it's going to work, but people sign up for like Facebook events, for example, and say, I'm going to go to this concert. So you know who's going to which city to which concert, and maybe you can build a database. Maybe you can do like a paid marketing afterwards and say, listen, this is the set we played yesterday. Maybe you want to listen to it again, and keep them alive and keep them close, and not just let them walk out of the concert venue and, you know, maybe see them again, because that's really where you can build your audience and where you're the closest. And that should be kept close as possible. That's what I think.
I think that's a great point. And I think it's a great way to summarize some of kind of what everybody's saying. And this has been so far a very nice panel, because it's everybody sort of chipping in on very similar views of things, which I guess makes us all feel like we know something, that we're approaching it in the right way. But I guess when you're getting results, it's sort of yeah, whatever. I just think the idea of online being where everything comes together, and online being sort of the linchpin of everything, the central element of your global marketing strategy, and on the artist level, owning your audience, knowing them, interacting with them, and setting the tone for everything comes through social media, where you can directly connect with fans in an unfiltered way. And yeah. Anyway, I wanted to present a few, maybe, so let's say a little case study. If we had an artist that was on Spotify, it's pretty early days, but they start to get picked up by some editorial because for whatever reason, things are working well in the algorithmic mysterious universe at Spotify or Apple or whatever. And they're streaming quite well, but they're at the really early days of building up their own fan base. What would be some ways that would be some things that you would recommend for them to be able to start building and maybe reaching out to some of these people who are liking their music based on not knowing who they are at all? That sort of like moods and moments type of artist who maybe has 2 million listeners on Spotify, but 2,000 followers. Like how are we approaching the music really connecting, but not having had the personality connect yet?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough spot sometimes to be in. We had quite a couple of cases where, you know, you had a lot of streaming going on in these like lean back playlists is what Spotify calls them, which is, yeah, you hit play and it runs for hours, but you don't necessarily look into the playlist and see who these artists are. And I think the only way to do is to go via the song that has this traction and maybe the hook, and really try to work with as many audio connections that you can possibly get. So that would for me be like a pre-roll ad that would, you know, try to get into these target groups, or do like, you know, Spotify themselves have audience themselves, so you can book those. And then try to get them hooked on your profile. Obviously, when you get them and they click through, something has to happen there. It can't just be like an empty page where there's just one picture and, you know, one trailer and that's it. So once they come to you and you have, you know, crossed that barrier with them, there has to be a whole new world to discover. So when that happens, you really have to be sort of quick to develop the story that you want people to engage with. And that's sometimes where I feel like time's running out and you don't want to decide on anything yet. But that's really when you have to, you know, do the homework and run with the flow that you're having. And yeah, that's really tricky sometimes.
But basically what you're saying is we're going back to one of these fundamental truths or these principles that you're supposed to build on foundationally, is beyond all the time, be engaging, be transparent, be authentic. Like if that's not there when you get lucky somewhere else, like you get lucky at Spotify, you get lucky with a TikTok dance or something like that, like the rest of it has to be right, and you need to be building on it and you need to be working on it. So yeah, I don't know, that one comes up sometimes. Another one I was thinking about, I saw you've unmuted as well, Jamie, but there's a lot of artists that try to say like, well, I'm not really comfortable sharing myself all the time. You know, what about Burial? He was just mysterious and that worked out for him. Or, you know, like artists that I think maybe back in the day maybe had a little bit more of a veneer, or they had like a public facing profile and then they were able to be quite private behind it. Obviously privacy is not really a thing in our lives today. Tech knows everything about us, and big data knows all of our habits, and every app that you're using is mining all your behaviors to some end. So does that kind of thing work still? Like, are you still able to not let people in a real way and create something on the outside?
Personally, I think it's a tricky one. I think it really comes down to the sort of music you're making, the style of artist that you are. You know, there's hundreds of examples of bands that are trying to still go down the sort of, you know, kind of questionable, not super public facing sort of way of marketing. And sometimes it can work if there's enough sort of cool creative to make it look a bit edgy and a little bit underground and cool. I think it's proving more and more difficult every year to try and do that convincingly. Like an example that springs back to mind is something that kind of fits the bill is the band My Chemical Romance, who went away for a few years and then came back about 7 months ago by just literally doing a series of really cryptic messages through social media. And they changed all of their Spotify canvases to be this like new branding that they were doing, and it kind of all became this really holistic on every single platform. It was this really cryptic, no one really knew what was happening, but people knew something was happening. And then obviously they went from that into announcing we're going to go on this big world tour, which has since been postponed. But I think that's the only kind of way to try and perhaps do it sort of a bit, you know, not being like a complete pop artist where you're just trying to get people's attention and you're trying to scream and shout about what you're doing. You know, I think maybe that's the only way to try and do it. But then following on from what Marie said, I think at the end of the day, if you're finding that you're getting really good success with a track on Spotify, that's kind of what all artists, whether you're underground or mainstream, are trying to achieve. They're wanting people to connect with the music that they're making. So if you've got a really catchy hook, it is about putting emphasis on that hook and putting it in front of people's faces and ears in other situations where they might not have seen it before. And it will just remind them that it's there. You know, when I was doing PR for the Pink Floyd exhibition, for example, we always said that for people to really understand what is happening with this exhibition and what we're trying to promote, people need to see it in a billboard, they need to read about it in a newspaper, and they need to see it on social media. And it is all of these things, it's seeing it in different places, which eventually gets something ingrained into someone's mind and makes them want to then go out of their way to investigate some more about what it is that they've heard and they've liked the idea of. So I think a great example of stuff that's happening a lot at the moment with, you know, especially commercial pop leaning acts and young acts is taking a track which is getting some traction on Spotify and making it work for TikTok. And that can be from renaming the track title to make it easy to search the hook on TikTok search engine to be able to put the sound in your video, to all the way through to, you know, getting an agency like Fanbytes or anybody on board to do proper engagement and influencer campaigns for your track. There's so many different things you can do, but at the end of the day, it all still revolves around that hook that got the DSPs interested in the music in the first place. So I think it's difficult, obviously, depending on the sort of music you're doing. You might be able to be a bit more elusive and be a bit more, you know, not screaming and shouting about what you're doing. But I think in a commercial pop sort of world, I think you kind of have to.
Yeah, and adding on to what Jamie was saying, I was going to go down the route of influencer as well. A lot of the artists I've worked with in the past, you know, some of them are completely against digital marketing, which is very, very difficult. We're not allowed to advertise on some platform or with some artists, or they don't want to be that kind of what I was saying before of like influencer. They don't want to be always on, and that kind of puts you in a difficult situation. And a lot of times, if you look at it, what the artists that are being successful in that space, a lot of times they're kind of either older artists or they have a fan base that has been around for a bit longer, especially kind of before this like TikTok influencer space. But even now with some brand new artists, some from like the last year, if they don't want to do that like really deep personal look on social media and they don't want to do digital advertising, then a lot of it is trying to tap into influencers and using, like you guys both said, that hook from that song and seeing if you can build a brand somewhere based on fans using your content rather than you using your content. And I know a lot of the times, like if you talk to TikTok, they're like, well, your artist has to be on it and they have to be active and they have to be doing all this stuff, but you can have success on platforms without actually being on them. It's about other people using that content. And then with that said, if also your artist doesn't want to do influencer campaigns or isn't interested in that, you just have to find like the one niche that fans are holding on to. Like maybe it is the live show, and there's a way that you can create some content and focus all of your efforts in one place, like YouTube, with some really cool live content or some interactive live content with your fans as well to continue to bolster that. Or maybe it's vinyl and fans really, really love your vinyl and your physical product rather than streaming, and you can lean into that a little bit more. So it's just finding like what actually works in this weird world of how social media really is kind of like the number one, but if it doesn't work, then what does?
But brand recognition, everyone's kind of saying that's important, whether you're an unknown artist who's having a little bit of a break with a track on DSPs or algorithms or TikTok or whatever, or you're an artist like My Chemical Romance or Pink Floyd, who may not want to be so explicit and be a little bit more cryptic. You kind of have that luxury because you have brand recognition. If you're a younger artist getting started, your brand recognition might just be your hook and nobody knows who you are. And it's up to you to sort of use that to leverage it and sort of parlay that into wider brand recognition that can last a little bit longer and hopefully generate you some more income. I'm just mindful of the time. I know we started a bit late, so maybe we can push the question and answer just a little bit, because we had a few questions that we were prepping for about things going on during COVID-19, how things have been lately. And I just wanted to maybe ask a little bit more generally, if everybody could just chip in. Is there anything that you're seeing that's particularly interesting, that's changed things significantly, or some takeaways or lessons learned since we've started our stay-at-homes, our lockdowns, our quarantines? Obviously, digital's been extremely important. Online's been everything. A lot of artists have had their revenue streams stripped away, everything but the things that people can still do from home. What are some takeaways you have? I see you've unmuted, Marie.
Yeah, I think we definitely had a strong learning curve. We had 4 bands who were supposed to go like on big arena tours this summer, so we were preparing for that. It was the backbone of what we wanted to do as part of the campaign. And I think as soon as we all learned that these concerts weren't about to happen, I think we obviously did what everyone did. We were trying to find ways of doing live streams, doing concerts online, and in hindsight I feel like those have been too much, and it was kind of flooding the market in a way, and people were like, okay, there's so many concerts now, I don't even know when and where they're happening, and there were like guides and overviews at what was streaming where, and I felt a bit like it was a bit of actionism happening, and everyone wanted to do something and connect with the audience, but maybe just giving it out for free. I'm not sure if that was the right strategy. Maybe if we had more time, I think we probably would have done it differently. What I think was great though was with Giant Rooks and Mickey Chance, who were both consulting, they invited the fans to be part of the home sessions as well. So they did like a digital choir, and people could sing to the song, and it was built into the song and then actually released. So I think that was a really smart way of not just playing and streaming one way, but also getting something back, and people could do something in their homes, singing awkwardly or not so much, and then entering the sound file. So I think that was a good way of doing it. But just playing, a session in not that great quality, I'm not that convinced if that's going to be sticking around for like a very long time. But I'm interested to hear what the other things, other ones things, because that's sort of what everyone's been rushing to do.
I'd loved the move away from crap live streams. If I'm honest, it was at the very start when the whole stay-at-home thing started. I remember most evenings here at home, it would hit 6 or 6:30 p.m. and I would get about 50 notifications every 5 minutes of this person has started a live stream, this person's gone live, this person's live on Twitter, people going back to Facebook Live, and it's understandable entirely as to why people jumped on that. And I had artists that I work with that did a few of those, but the fact that everyone was doing it, as Marie said, it literally completely flooded the market, and people became very, very bored of it very quickly. So it was one of the first things that I kind of encouraged my artists to move away from and try to think of some new opportunities which can still actually be in the live world and like live streaming, but aren't necessarily just picking up an acoustic guitar and playing some songs. So random examples of things that we've done with some of my artists is sort of like cookathons, sort of like getting the fans to 24 hours ahead of time suggest some stuff that they could cook, and they'll cook that on Instagram Live, for example. And it's just it's a little bit different. It's still connecting with the fan base and getting them excited, and they're able to watch what's going on. But instead of it just being like, oh, here's a 20-minute session that I'm doing of playing, like electrically produced songs on an acoustic guitar, like everyone's done. It's just something a little bit different. But then I think with, platforms like Twitch especially, there's a lot of bands that I've seen and artists that I've seen that have kind of gone a step further, and they're trying to almost bring in a different segment of their fan base who might be more willing to spend money and help, provide that supplemental revenue. And instead of just doing like sessions, or even if they got like a full production enough setup to be able to do a full on set, they actually go a step further, and they might do things like this almost, where it's like Zoom chats with the band members and the producer of an album, and they'll spend an hour going through like the Pro Tools session from the record, and they will do like a track by track of how we recorded this, and the fans can pay and do the donations and all of that to obtain and have access to that sort of content, which generally would never really happen. So I think it's exciting to see that all of this live stuff is, it's happened. It's great that these platforms exist, because a few years ago we didn't have Instagram Live, we didn't have Twitch, we didn't have any of these things. So it's great that it's possible to do this. But I just think moving forward, as if this is going to be going on for a little while, people just need to make sure they're constantly forward thinking and not thinking, oh yeah, let's just be basic and do a few songs on an acoustic guitar.
Hello. Sorry, I've been playing with the mute button. I wasn't sure if I should add to this or not, but unfortunately I do have a meeting in a few minutes, just to let you guys know. As much as I definitely want to answer some questions, and I'm happy to answer some questions afterwards on email if anything comes through. But just to quickly add, Jamie had some great points, and I was going to mention some of those as well. But going back to like the crap live streams, it's actually really interesting because a lot of our like radio and press partners in the US are still kind of holding on to those. Some of them are really good and really well produced, and they're not necessarily on like Instagram Live where you have like a fleeting audience, but some of them are still there. And it's, as much as you might not have like the most viewers, or it's not the best quality, it's really important to do those things to show like radio stations you're supporting or press outlets you're supporting. But then like on the other spectrum, it's a lot easier right now to get like an NPR Tiny Desk, because it's like NPR Tiny Desk at home, which means that you can do it in a totally different way, and it doesn't disqualify you from doing it in the future on the actual Tiny Desk. So there's actually a lot more opportunities in that sense. But then like going back to what Jamie said, if you're an artist doing it yourself, like do it really well produced, do some really creative stuff. Like we saw Churches did something really cool on a late night TV show in the US. Katy Perry had an amazing performance on American Idol where she had like this really cool green screen. And then also Twitch has been blowing up. Like I've seen billboards when I've been on walks, I've seen billboards for Twitch, and it's a place where you can make money, and artists are getting on it. And I feel like Twitch is just kind of like the next thing that everybody is going to get on, and it's just that next level of being able to connect with fans directly.
Cool. Yeah, I guess now we can open on questions and hopefully answers. Jonas Webner is asking, how do I dance good for TikTok? I'm just kidding. I don't know how questions start though. Do people just write into us? There's a Q&A part, and then there's also, I think people can just talk to us in the chat too. I don't know if someone from Music Norway wants to tell us what to do. We're lost now. We've said all our things. Yeah, I don't know. I'm waiting for guidance here. But before we do the questions, I'd just say thank you to everybody for joining. I've had a really good conversation, and I've learned a lot. So thank you to all of our lovely panelists, and for Music Norway hosting this. Music Norway is saying in the chat, fire away with questions. Questions in the Q&A, Carolina is now saying. So Q&A is open and people can answer or ask questions, and I will read them aloud to the panel.
no pressure here.
Guys, I unfortunately have to go, but thank you so much for everything. And again, if there are any questions I can help answer after the fact somehow on email or whatever, let me know. But thank you so much. I really appreciated this. Hopefully my rambling has given you some time to think of some questions, so then the panelists remaining can answer them. So great to see you all and meet you, and take care. Good luck with everything. Stay healthy, stay safe.
See you, Rachel.
See you later.
Bye.
All right, we have 2 questions. We're going to start with what changes would you make to your track to make them TikTok ready?
I don't necessarily think you can change a track to make it TikTok ready. I think you can amend metadata to make it more algorithmically searchable. There's a big article that I read, I think it was on Medium, I can't remember right now, but it was like last week, which was all about how major labels are in the headspace of, let's just, if we see something's beginning to take off and beginning to explode, we want to make it as searchable and accessible as possible. So don't have any qualms, don't have any worries about potentially changing the title of a song. That realistically doesn't change anything. It's still the same song, you'll still get the same royalties, you'll just benefit from it the most. But I wouldn't ever, I mean, I was about to contradict myself because of Drake, but like Drake's new song is obviously written for TikTok. That obviously works. I wouldn't go with that mentality for every single release. I think it would get quite tiresome and quite boring quite quickly.
I actually am not going to take the bait on starting a Drake conversation, but
Not get into that. Not today.
I'm from Toronto too, so I got a lot of grace for Drake. I give him a lot of space and I let him. But let's somebody is asking, what's your best advice for someone who recently graduated, who's trying to enter the music industry to work with marketing and branding?
I would say maybe do an internship would be my advice. I think if you're coming directly from uni, I think it's a great place to go into a major label, a digital agency, a distributor. All of them have great marketing departments who deal with these kind of things every day and who have great experts who you can learn from. And then just the hard part in digital marketing, I think you all will agree, is to stay on top of everything, because everything changes every day. So what you knew last week is not going to be worth anything in 2 months from now. So really being eager to learn and apply everything you're learning, and not being afraid to take, maybe doing something wrong or maybe take a wrong decision, but then pivot from that and try something new. I think that's the best advice I was given too.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question here that I'm going to slightly alter. Is it what can an artist do to be relevant and gain traction after a release? I'm gonna say maybe we're talking about what things can be done post-release in order to gain traction for a song that maybe went a little bit under the radar.
My opinion is a campaign's never done. I think Marie touched on it earlier. Like, there isn't really such thing as a campaign anymore. You don't have to release everything on day one when the tracks come out. There's so much that you can do over the course of the weeks into months after a track's been released that you can really use to help sort of build that momentum and really sort of keep pushing everything upwards as opposed to down. And that could be things from alternative versions for your VOD, video on demand on YouTube. So you could do basic things from a visualizer, lyric video, music video, acoustic version, all of these different versions, which from a YouTube perspective, as a part of your artist channel, all contributes towards the views for the one project. You can do all of these things just to help, keep your fans optimized, really, and just constantly give them as much content as they could need. I think it's quite likely now, just with I'm sure Marie from your Spotify days, you'll be able to testify for this as well. There's so much music being released every single day. It's not possible for every single track to be hugely successful from day one, but it's about building up that story about how the track has performed. How has it done with your key fans that you had from beforehand? What have you grown from? How have you grown in the space that the track has been out to get you to that next stage?
I think also something that we've touched on through the whole panel is that your social game is just on point all the time, because people are going to discover things long after the fact. That release date sometimes feels like a very crucial moment, and often it is. It's the moment where something goes from being new to not being new, and that's huge with DSPs. That's huge with algorithms. That's huge in so many aspects. But at the same time, I have countless examples of songs that I've worked with, or artists that have had their breakthrough 6 months, a year after a song comes out is when it really starts to take off. And like even right now, like with the artists we work with, or we're putting together like a new releases with right now, Boy Pablo is gearing up for new music. We're still seeing old songs coming out of nowhere and starting to peak. And it's not out of anything super special. It's like people get into lockdown and then certain songs start to resonate with people differently. And you see it go from like 30,000 to 100,000 streams a day on Spotify, and it just maintains there. And we're looking for other reasons why, or other inciting incidents, and they're not really super prevalent. It's just something started working better. It got suggested a little bit more, and so starts a 6-month upswing on a song that it just happens. So I think never think of it as like a fatalistic kind of thing. A song has had its release date, and those things can live on.
I think something it's different depending on where you are as an artist and what sort of artist you are. I know we've said that a lot, but if you are an independent artist and it is just you working on yourself, or maybe it's you and a manager, then it might be more difficult to work out why those random data spikes might be happening that then cause you to have an upsurge. But if you are slightly more established, if you've got a publishing team, if you've got a sync team, if you've got all of these different components within your project, it's possible that the reason you're getting these results popping up in your Spotify for artists, maybe you got a sync on a TV show in Finland, or maybe you got something on a radio station in New Zealand, and people have started shazamming the track. People have gone, I really love what this is, I'm going to check it out. And it sort of goes from there. So if you are in a position where you have, access to things, whether it be sound charts or chart metrics, all of these things now are all tracking a lot of radio and TV opportunities, as well as Shazam. So hopefully if you do start to get pick up in those sorts of areas, you'll be able to be aware of that and make sure that you're capitalizing on those things as it happens.
Following the data, I would say, is also like just a crucial thing. Just know how to read your data. Just be checking your feeds all the time. Like when you wake up in the morning and have coffee, open your Spotify for artists, open your Apple for artists, take a look at sound charts or Chartmetric or any of those like playlist tracking or social media demographic breakdown sites that you're paying for. Or using free versions of, or whatever. Those kind of tools you just learn by watching as well. And then when something does happen, you try to trace it back to an inciting incident. Maybe the inciting incident is just 3 months of really good social practice, and then that's it. And you've learned something, and it's good. And you can have faith next time that you're going to get a long tail for that song. To move on. There's I guess we can answer a few of these by typing stuff out, but okay. There's 4 questions, time's run out. It's up to us if we want to answer them before we log off. Let's just do these 4 questions. One I can say, first of all, is somebody is saying, is something like DistroKid a platform you'd recommend for distributing your own music, or are there better options for distributing independently? Somebody with an extensive background doing digital distribution, I would basically say, and feel free to chime in. You guys have been on various aspects of digital distribution yourselves. So I would say DistroKid's good. It's a very good technological solution. It will get your music to the right places. It will get your money back to you. Generally, it's pretty transparent as well. But I would say that if you are somebody who is picking up a little bit more traction and a little bit more is going on, you're going to want somebody like Rachel working with you at The Orchard or In Grooves or any of these other global distributors that have a little bit of plus services, maybe an artist service division, something like Cobalt AWOL, that there's other independent distributors that maybe offer another scalable services that can go up to basically #1 album campaigns in multiple countries. So it depends on your level. I would say as an entry level thing though, DistroKid, fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. When I was a little bit younger, I mean, I'm 24, so I'm not that old, but when I was a little bit younger and I was in a band, I distributed through DistroKid, and we got editorial support with Apple and with Spotify. So I think there's definitely a lot of potential there. I completely agree, though. As soon as you're getting to the point where there is more traction, there's more to talk about, having a dedicated person at a renowned company like The Orchard or AWOL or InGrooves just gives an added bit of weight, again, to everything that you're doing. I think, you know, with a service like DistroKid or TuneCore or CD Baby, any of these companies where you pay to distribute, you will never get a one-to-one service. You'll never have someone actively try and push your release as far as you can. Whereas if you have a dedicated label manager or distribution manager at any of these companies, they'll be pitching it into your reps at Spotify and Apple, et cetera, et cetera. They'll be doing a lot of that sort of general distribution or label work that you would get from a traditional label.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Maria, I'm interested to hear from your side, actually.
Yeah, I think it's,
when I've worked with like artists that have been completely independent, no distributor, they've gone through independent.
I've certainly seen it. I think it's a decision you have to make it as an artist. You know, all this question comes down to do you want to exchange your revenue percentages for a service, and is that service what kind of service are you expecting? Like, do you want to just drop off the record and everyone does the marketing? You should probably go for a major label. If you want to, you know, get 80% of your revenues and do most of the work yourself, you probably go for something like The Orchard or InGrooves or something else. So I think it really depends on how much risk are you willing to take yourself and how much work do you want to outsource. And that's, in the end, a decision of where the risk lands. I've seen artists who've gone through like DistroKids or Recordjet in Germany who had a global hit song, but then they had a really, really good team behind them. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it all has to be backed up by the distribution or whoever does the distribution. There are other ways to team up, but you can't do it yourself from a certain level on, I would say.
I'd say like,
yeah.
We're a record label with 3 employees, and I would say the help that we get from our distributor is just so invaluable. I mean, we have some revenue coming through so that they, you know, you get time from them, but I think that, you know, it's like having some extra employees that you're paying for with your distribution percentage, which usually turns out to be a pretty good deal. I'm going to roll a few questions together. We have people asking
on that last, just before we move on.
Yeah, go for it.
If you are like a brand new artist, like if you're super young and you have no contacts with, you know, with InGrooves or anyone like that, don't not go through DistroKid. Like, that's going through those independents is not a bad thing at all. I would just make sure that you're distributing things as early as you possibly can if you want to have any sort of success, because you're not having people directly work your tracks for you. You know, when you're doing your Spotify for Artists editorial pitch, make sure you're getting it in as early as you can. Same with Apple, they now have an online one across the world. Time is like such an important factor in that. Don't leave it until a week or 10 days beforehand. Give it
be early. Lead time is real, man. People have tens of thousands of songs coming at them all over the place, and if you want a chance, you need to give them time to listen to it. There's a few I want to wrap together. People are asking about parallel posting on different platforms. Is that good or bad? If you're gaining traction on one platform, should you try to diversify or keep your focus on one platform? And then another question that is sort of, should you be present on all social and digital platforms or focus on certain ones?
Yeah, I think I probably answered one of this right at the first question. I think you should diversify, but that doesn't mean just taking one thing and putting it everywhere. So if you diversify, decide which platform you want to take on and for which reason, or who are the people behind that you want to reach. So we often get the questions like, do I have to be on Twitter? If you're not into, you know, a dialogue with other people, because Twitter is all about having a dialogue and being really interactive, then it's not the platform for you, and it's probably a waste of time. if you don't want to, be present and, do challenges, maybe don't go on TikTok. It's probably not your thing. So really decide like what the platform is, whether you're willing to invest in it. And if you do it, find something that really is working with the platform and embraces it and like works with the algorithms. That's different for all the platforms that are out there. That's why I would say don't just do one thing and like post it everywhere, because that's just not going to get you, traction on any of them. So I would really pick, pick my battles there.
Yeah, I think also like if you're starting to get traction somewhere, it's probably because you're interacting with people on that platform. Like your audience is on that platform. Maybe it's a age group, a demographic thing. Maybe your Facebook's slow, but your Instagram is popping, and that's usually because people are reacting to the way that you're using that platform. And I would say always double down on something that you're doing well. Focus a ton of time on the thing that you're doing well and not think like as much about like, okay, I'm doing great on Instagram, but how do I succeed on Facebook? Because you've got 500,000 Instagram followers and 50,000 Facebook followers, like, focus on the thing that's working super well, and put a lot of your focus there, I would say. But at the same time, don't ignore everything. Like you can be active on some platforms and you can sort of like, baby step into them. You can learn them. You can realize that maybe like I'm a Twitter, Instagram kind of artist. Like those two things fit into my personal habits of using social media so that I can be successful and leverage an audience and not leverage an audience, but like you develop an audience and interact with them in a real way that people respond to. But if you mix too many things in there, if you try to be everything to everybody, you're nothing to anybody. So like be yourself, and part of being yourself, I would say, and that authenticity, these foundational building blocks is like interact with people on the ones that make sense to you and do that the most. Maybe your manager is like putting bullshit tweets out there all the time or whatever, just like really lame stuff like album out here link, but like maybe you don't like Twitter and you don't do it at all, then maybe don't be on Twitter or be on Twitter. But I just think that like be very focused on the ones that you're good at.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. I think Marie got it completely spot on. I think content is made for a certain platform. It will not work on everything. That said, however, something that I've seen a lot quite recently, especially on TikTok, is people who have started to get some recognition. They've started to build up a lot of followers. They will put, say, a 20-second TikTok up, and they will then say at the end of the video, go to my Instagram to see the results. So that's quite a nice way I like of seeing people really making that connection between the two platforms, because TikTok natively allows you to link and authorize your Instagram to your TikTok profile. You can actually get people just to click on your profile, click one button, and they'll be on your Instagram. If they like what you've done, they might hit that follow button. So it's just cross-pollinating that audience over from one platform over to another where it might fit. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the time it might not. But if you do have a certain piece of content that you think is working really, really well, they have the share functions to put it on your story built into TikTok. All of these things exist so that you can at least try it. And I think the way that I look at it is experiment. If it works for you, then great. If it doesn't, you've tried it and you've then got the data to have that opinion that it doesn't work.
Totally agree. We're being asked to wrap up. There's one more question, which is basically asking, how is the media landscape going to change post-COVID? Would be very interesting to hear all of your oracle wisdoms and your prophecies, but we're being asked to wrap up. So unfortunately, we're going to have to like just put those vibrations out into the ether and hope that it gets into people's heads. Yeah. So thank you everybody again for coming. I learned a lot. I had a great time. If Music Norway wants to say something to finish this off, they can.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, guys. It was awesome. I learned so much. So thank you, Jamie, Tim, and Marie. And our next panel.
And sort of Rachel. No, I'm just kidding.
Rachel, of course. Yeah, sort of. No, it was great. Obviously, we went way over time, so I just appreciate that you all stayed on and took your time to answer questions. And our next panel is next week, and it will be an introduction to the Mexican market. So I hope people want to know more about that. And we also have we will have one-on-one sessions with some of the panelists. So if someone's interested in that, then I have some information coming out on our website soon. And yeah, that was all. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cool.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.